Oh, thank you, Demaris. You know, it is as people come to as guest speakers from out of town, they're just amazed at the quality of our music program. And I think just the fact that we've got 3 members of our praise team that already have a CD out, and I know Demaris has the CDs, in the foyer fountain room for after the service. We also have a 4th one coming out with a CD. So I wanted to just acknowledge our Spirit of Praise team led by Michael Davis. So if you'll just give them a round of applause, I appreciate it. Last Sunday was the Festival of Faiths held by the Center for Interfaith Cooperation. This was the 3rd annual one. Anyone who helped or cooperated in the Festival of Faiths, would you please rise so that we can acknowledge you too? Thank you very much. I know Sydney Webb and Pam Hayes headed up that project. They're so tired they aren't here today. And especially when the Festival of Faiths turned into the Festival of Perspiration, because it got to be about 91 degrees out there. But I got to participate in some roundtable discussions there for about an hour and a half. We were basically Butler's Desmond Tutu Center, just wanted to get some feedback on various things that we see as far as concerns and needs of the community and our opinions on various things that are going on, everything from the RFRA to just violence in the streets. So I think we had a very productive session concurrently with the Festival of Faiths. And then we're now gearing up for this fall festival. I know a lot of people talked about how wonderful the neighborhood festivals they'd held here back 5-10 years ago. So we're going to do that on the first Saturday in October, just out here in the parking lot. Hopefully we can kind of get flyers and handbills out through the neighborhood, especially all of the new buildings that are going up here as people are moving back downtown, and just let them know that we're here and what we're all about. So I'd love to see you participate in that too. Okay, that takes care of that. So good morning. I've got here some prayers that children have written to God. Dear God, please send Dennis Clark to a different summer camp this year. Peter. Dear God, thank you for the baby brother, but what I asked for was a puppy. I never asked you for anything before. You can look it up. Joyce. Dear Mr. God, I wish you have not made it so easy for people to come apart. I had to have 3 stitches and a shot. Janet. Dear God, I bet it's very hard for you to love all of everybody in the whole world. There are only 4 people in our family, and I can never do it. Nancy. Dear God, did you mean for giraffes to look like that, or was it an accident? Norma. Dear God, I didn't think that orange went with purple until I saw the sunset you made on Tuesday night. That was really cool. Thomas. And dear God, I am doing the best that I can. Really. Bobby. Many of us learned to pray when we were kids. And as we unspool our spiritual unfoldment, it's interesting how many things we have to revisit that we learned as kids or as young adults, and things that we took as the gospel truth. So when I learned how to pray, I learned, you kneel down, by your bed, and you send out a petition to God. And if God's in a good mood, God will grant it for you. And I know a lot of other people have learned that too. Unity takes a little bit different approach to prayer, and that's what I'm going to work on today and actually give you some practical tools. So as a unity minister, for me to say, hey, just pray on it and it'll be all right, for someone who hasn't been exposed to more effective ways of prayer, it's kind of like saying, all you need to do is to eat 3 square meals a day and you'll be fine. And then the person walks into the grocery store. What am I supposed to eat? What do I choose? So for prayer, it's a matter of how do I pray? Why do I pray? What do I pray for? And as a kid, learning, praying the kind of prayers that I just gave up, I started to notice a pattern, and that was it didn't seem that my prayers were being answered. So I became very cynical about prayer, until I had a crisis in my life. I was going through a divorce and just was suicidal and all that. And then suddenly, just rather than getting into anything elaborate, just saying, God, help. Suddenly through my intuition, I started getting guidance, on how to get my life back on track and make it much better than it ever was before. So one of the things that I need to be aware of is that I need to help people recognize that you sometimes have to let go of our old definitions, of words, or our old thoughts, our old beliefs about things. There's an old saying that if horses had gods, gods would look like horses. And that's true of human beings, too. We tend to project a vision of a God, someone up there in the clouds, that we need to pray to, and that has all of the strengths and weaknesses of a human being, including anger and fickleness and caprice. Brother Lawrence Brother Lawrence lived from 1614 through 1691. He lived in a Carmelite monastery in Paris. And he wrote a little booklet called The Practice and the Presence of God. And it really touched a lot of people, even to this day. The problem is when you say you need to practice the presence of God, you're allowing for the possibility that God isn't present already. Or sometimes you think, okay, well, if God is everywhere, that maybe you seem to be forgetting that God is within you. The ancient Greeks had a saying, God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. And oddly, some of the early pioneers who encountered the Native Americans, the Lakotas, there was Black Elk, who much has been written about, and he said virtually the same thing, even though he had no contact with the ancient Greeks. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. If you've ever had an opportunity to see a holographic plate, when you just look at the plate, it just looks kind of fuzzy, but then they hit it with a laser and you get a three-dimensional picture. And if you break that plate up into 1,000 pieces and you just take one piece but put it up the laser, you can put your eye up to it and sure enough you see the whole picture there in that little chip. I'm going to ask Candy to put up our first slide right now. Unity talks about the three omnis. There's omniscient, which is all-knowing. There's omnipotent, which is all-powerful. And omnipresent, which means everywhere present. And so I usually translate it by talking about a God that's all-knowing, all-powerful, and everywhere present. So if God is present everywhere, God is present in us. In every cell of our bodies, God is present. There's also the all-knowing mind of God, connected with every cell of our body, connected with our own knowingness, our brain, our mind, our hearts, our intuition. And imagining the most powerful thing you can, recognize that God is even more powerful than that. God is everywhere. I've experienced it myself, and I hear many people say, you go out in nature, maybe to one of our fine state parks, and you feel the presence of God. Well, is it because God is there and God isn't here? No, it's because we've dropped the veil. We've allowed the illusion of separation to just drop away, and we're open and receptive to God's living spirit of truth. We're open and receptive. Wow! I'm in the moment finally. I'm not thinking about the past or being concerned about the future. I'm in the moment, just breathing in the fresh air. And you just feel that presence. That presence is available to us at any time. So, what we need to understand is that there's no one to pray to. It's like praying to the electric company. When you walk into a dark room in your home and you pray to IPL, please turn on my lights. Wouldn't it be wiser for you to just turn on the lamp yourself? Because the power is already there. You just need to switch it on. We need to awaken to it. In the Gospel of Matthew, 6th chapter, 8th verse, Jesus says, "Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him." Oh, wait a minute. If God knows what I need before I ask Him, what's the point in praying? The point in praying is that we don't change God, we change ourselves. We wake up to the power that's already there. We wake up to the prosperity that's already there. We wake up to the health that is already there. We've just been blind to it. We've been talked out of it. We've been rationalized out of it. We've been trained out of it. Suddenly we open to it and it's like, wow, it's right here. And it's been here all the time. We have a full realization of the power that is in us. And if we activate our power of will, our power to say, go forward with this. Yes, I embrace this fully. It's daunting, but it's important for us to be humble about it. I know when Carla and I served the congregation down in Hollywood, Florida, one woman in the congregation was dating a guy, and it turns out he was from a much more fundamentalist or evangelical Christian. And one of his friends said to Phyllis, who was the woman in our congregation, "You guys in Unity are dangerous. You think you're God." And I thought it was an interesting twist. It's like, well, no, we believe that we're part of God. We believe that we're connected to God, but we don't believe we're God. You know, at least not in the connotation people mean when they say that. So, God can do no more for us than we can do through us, or that God can do through us, or through others. One of the important things I teach people in prayer classes is when you sit down to pray, pray for others first, or at least include it somewhere in your prayer time. Because whatever energy we put out is going to come back to us. So if we're praying for others, we know that other people are also praying in alignment with us. As we co-create with God, we need to discern what is ours to do. So if we are ready to pray, the vast majority of time when someone says they're going to pray about something, it's because they're concerned about something, or they have a crisis in a situation in their lives that is not going according to our preferences. Or it may be happening to somebody else's life. So what areas in your life or in another person's life who's close to you needs some attention? Is it your health? Is it occupation? Is it relationships, harmony between relationships, friends, family, or an intimate relationship that you have with someone? Is it money? Do you have enough to pay all of the bills on time and in full? Or is it just spiritual growth, your final awakening to this God? So in Unity, we do emphasize affirmative prayer, a declarative sentence. But there are three ways that Jesus modeled for us to pray, and that is to ask, to affirm, or to give thanks, or all three for that matter. And of course, we have many publications that give you affirmations that you can use. The Daily Word that's been going since 1924. An affirmation, a little bit of a narrative, and then a Bible verse. An affirmation for you to use for the day. And of course, we put it out on Twitter and post it on Facebook every day as to what the affirmation is in the Daily Word. But I recognized that I had turned a very special corner when I started to compose or write my own affirmative prayers. It was like kicking it into overdrive, because suddenly it was truly coming from my heart. On the front of your bulletin are some takeaways for today. We're going to go through those, so I'm going to ask Candy to put up our first slide. I wanted to see, is Andrea Whirl here today? Is Andrea here? Okay. I was thinking of using Andrea Whirl as an example. Andrea was a spiritual leader here from 1999 to 2001. She has a challenge with cancer. So the first thing you do in writing an affirmative prayer is write what the situation is, or what are the circumstances? How are things? Now with Andrea, she has a diagnosis of cancer, and she started chemotherapy. And this is your place to just vent. Just put it, just write it down and just, express your anger about it or your frustration or your sadness. Just write down the way things are. So for like in this example, let's say Andrea has cancer. That's the way things are right now. Then we move on to number 2, Candy, please. Oughtness. Okay, now take what you've written and write the way things ought to be. How should things be? Here again, now you get your righteousness up. And you talk about the way things should be. Like with Andrea, well, okay, Andrea had cancer, so how should things ought to be? Well, Andrea ought to be healthy. She's supposed to be healthy. Then move forward to the next line. Then, after you've written that out, now take what you've written as an ought or supposed to be and write it as if it is already. So, using Andrea as an example. Andrea is healthy. Andrea is healthy. You've written it in the present tense, and these are your affirmative prayers. You need to write them in the way as if it's happening right now, or if it's just happened, or if it's consistently happening. We consistently have the revenues that we need to pay all of our bills in full and on time. Something like that. And that takes us back to our number 4, which is our fill in the blank this week. Ography. Add the passion to it. If it's coming from your heart, if you've already written this, you probably have got an emotional charge to it already. But move to the proactive form of emotion, which is passion. Andrea is embracing and expressing the divine idea of wholeness and health. Just picture the spiritual substance coming into that prayer need and demonstrating here in the physical world. Seeing everyone as loved. We are an inclusive, thriving spiritual center that inspires conscious transformation. So what do we end up with? What is the ography? Candy? You have written your ought to be ography. Some Unity True students like to keep a journal, of the affirmations they come up with. And it can be very enlightening to go back and look at where you were, say, a year before or a decade before. But then comes the question about what is reasonable, what is possible. For example, if someone were to pray, I now sprout wings and can fly. Have you seen someone demonstrate that prayer? Well, they haven't sprouted wings from, say, their back, but isn't it amazing how the human mind has come up with the technology for many modes of flying, or many techniques in flying? So, the interesting thing about answered prayer is it comes through us in the physical world. So we've got the affirmative prayers. Now we need to prepare to pray. And that's where meditation comes in. Being willing to just kind of get quiet, and rather than blurt out all your prayers right away, just be willing to just take some time in the silence to just, when I lead prayers, I usually say, let go of any thoughts of the past, let go of any concerns about the future. Be in this moment. And in this moment, we feel the presence of God, the all-knowingness of God, and that power of God. And as we feel ourselves just infused with that amazing presence, we can pray from here. So we take 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever feels right to you, where you've gotten centered, and then from there, you launch those prayers. Andrea Worrell is embracing the divine idea of perfect health now. Or sometimes we put a deadline on it. She's expressing perfect health by September 30th, or whatever your situation is, like say health, occupation, relationship, money, spiritual growth. You have written an affirmative prayer and you send it out. There's a good example of how prayer works, and that is, most of us, I think, have seen a bow and arrow used. Now, the conventional wisdom is if I want to get from point A to point B, I need to make every step that I take be in the direction of point B. So if you take an arrow, I can take an arrow and I can throw it at a target, but it doesn't seem to have much velocity, does it? So if I talk to an archer, the archer would say, no, you don't throw it at the target. Instead, you take it, you put it on the bow, and you pull back. You pull back within. And suddenly it gathers all of this power. And through practice, the archer knows just how much to pull and where to aim, and then and it hits the target. It's a wonderful synthesis between Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy. And it's an interesting time in the evolution of the world because East and West are coming together. And there, of course, is some friction about that. But in the East, think about the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Shinto. They believe that you need to just go within and get centered. Some, though, take it to an extreme where they'll sit in a cave for years at a time, and they don't want to interact with the physical world. The Western philosophy, the Judeo-Christian Muslim philosophy is you need to go out there and do things. You need to plow the earth. Put the sweat of your brow into changing the earth. Well, what if the evolution of the world is we need to bring these two together? This is what the founders of Unity, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, brought together 125 years ago. Wow, yeah, if you go within, get centered, gather, connect to that power of God. You don't have to pray to IPL because, hey, the power is already here. And then wham, you put out the affirmative prayer. You put it out, in, like I say, in a present tense sentence. Another thing we need to learn from the archer is to let go of the prayer. Occasionally we hear someone say, well, I prayed all night about that. Boy, I was just up all night thinking about it. It's like, well, were you truly praying or were you having concentrated worry for the whole night? Because whatever we focus on is going to expand. So if we truly believe that we are already spiritual beings having a human experience, we need to learn to go within, send out that prayer, and just let it go. Release it into the spiritual realm knowing that perfect results are unfolding. Then we start to see our demonstrations in the world. They come through coincidences. Say, well, isn't it a coincidence that this should happen right now? And the beauty of this, of course, is that the mind cannot hold contradictory thoughts at the same time. You cannot be focused on a problem and be focused on God at the same time. So place your focus on God. And I'm going to ask Candy then to move forward with the next slide. So our takeaways this week is go ahead and write something out the way things are. Then write the way they ought to be. And then write the ought to be as if it is and is in the present tense. Your autobiography. And then take some time to meditate, get centered, affirm your prayers, and don't forget to let go of the arrow as it flies off into the universe. Our closing story is a 3-minute video from Steve Hartman of the CBS Evening News, who found the presence of God in nature and had an interesting experience.
I have a confession to make. Even though I only do this at my place in upstate New York, after the kids are in bed. The fact is, I have a weed addiction.
Here we go.
I just can't stop pulling the things.
Oh, yeah.
Mugwort, Canada thistle, and leafy goldenrod are some of my favorites.
That's the stuff.
I realized the extent of my addiction only recently, after my cameraman interviewed my wife Andrea about it.
He goes out at 7 o'clock at night and weeds until dark. I mean, sometimes he's out there past dark.
And her point is?
It's not weeding a garden, it's weeding 5 acres.
4.5, technically. See, a few years ago I had this idea, to turn this weedy hillside into a beautiful prairie full of native wildflowers and grasses. I contacted this man, who would eventually become my dealer.
We started with prairie plants.
Neil Duvall owns the Prairie Nursery in Westfield, Wisconsin. He got me hooked on weeds through gateway plants like purple coneflower, compass plant, and smooth aster.
We're trying to get you hooked. Yes, my product is highly addictive. It's called Love of Nature.
But here's the problem. Before you see those flowers in the magazine, you often need to spend a great deal of time weeding a new prairie meadow. And Neil made no mention of how addicting that can be.
I would come out here every night and dread it, and then a switch flipped, and I started coming out here and loving it.
Weeding can induce a meditative state. And that is therapy for all of us in this crazy world we live in, when you can just tune everything out and focus on one single-minded purpose.
Of course, the downside to a laser focus like that is that sometimes the rest of the world becomes a blur. For example, I'm told the prairie actually looks pretty nice now, but honestly, I can't see the flowers through the weeds. I know there are still a lot of them lurking in here, and that's okay. I mean, what else am I going to do at this point? Just give up on the whole project?
It would,
Andrea?
I could live without it.
You want your husband back, don't
I
you?
know. I don't know if I could live with how defeated my husband would feel if we gave it up.
I thought that was sweet. I'm going to take her to dinner. After the first frost, of course. Steve Hartman, at home, in Catskill, New York.
From the Bible's book of Job, 22nd chapter, 27th verse. You will make a prayer to him, and he will hear you. And you will pay your vows, surrendering part of your free will to God. You will declare a thing, and it will be established for you, and light will shine on your ways. And may you always be open to God's guidance and grace. Now time for our tithes and offerings. I know last year we celebrated the 100th anniversary of Unity of Indianapolis. And Unity has always been an inclusive and an open-minded community of spiritual seekers. We encourage personal initiative and growth. We're spiritual, holistic, and intuitive. So if you're going to give something today, just take it now in your hand. If you're going to give electronically on the unityofindy.com website, on the Donate tab, just hold the amount that you're giving there in mind. Open your heart and pour love into it. Recognize that whatever we give unconditionally and in love comes back to us multiplied, at least 100 times. Then let's say the affirmation together on the screen. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I give, all that I receive, and I am grateful.